Good afternoon, everybody. Uh, Welcome back after our brief break, hiatus from Ottawa. Today we have a full agenda. We're going to be discussing and reviewing and asking and getting some answers and questions on the main estimates for 2016-2017 with respect to the areas that fall under the jurisdiction of this committee, those being the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the National Energy Board, Department of Natural Resources, and the Northern Pipeline Agency. And in that respect, we are very fortunate to be joined for a second time, and we're very grateful, Minister, for you taking time out again to be with us, given your very, very busy schedule, as well as Deputy Minister, Mr. Bob Hamilton, for the first hour. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. For the first hour, and then in the second hour, I understand, Mr. Hamilton, you're gonna stay with us, joined by another one of your colleagues, and we can continue our discussion. So, on that note, I am going to turn the floor over to you, Minister, and we can discuss the estimates and reasons we're here today. So thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm glad to be back again, and so soon. We had a very good conversation the first time I had a chance to sit down with you, and I think I said then, and I'd be pleased to say again, that I really believe this is at the very heart of Parliament. Members from all sides having an open debate about issues that matter to Canadians. We may disagree on some of the detail, but we certainly agree on one thing, and that is that we all care about the best interests of our country. And I'm very pleased to spend the next hour with you talking about the Natural Resources Department. This time, I'll talk about the main estimates for the current fiscal year, the Supplementary Estimate C, and of course, our government's first budget. As I said when I was here in February, we share a big responsibility with this portfolio. Our task is to make sure Canada's natural resources are developed sustainably as part of a strong economy and a clean environment, and in ways that ensure local communities are the true beneficiaries. All of these things depend upon the choices we as parliamentarians make, the priorities we set, the principles we establish, and the investments we make. The main estimates are part of that. They provide the fiscal base for the coming year. But the main estimates are only part of the story. Budget 2016 fills in the details. It outlines our overarching vision that Canadians are ready and eager to embrace the low-carbon, clean growth economy of tomorrow, that economic growth and environmental protection are not competing interests, but vital components of a single engine of innovation, and that Canadian ingenuity can rise to the challenge of solving today's problems, bettering our lives, and bringing us the future. A future that will be better, brighter, and more prosperous than we can imagine. So in many ways, our first budget reflects the great opportunities we see in Canada's resource industries to support research and development, to invest in clean technology and innovation, to promote clean energy and alternative fuels, to engage in more meaningful consultations with Indigenous people and local communities, and to develop greener ways to extract and process our natural resources and get them to market. All of these things are front and center in Budget 2016, with Natural Resources Canada figuring prominently in our government's investment plans. Those highlights include $87.2 million over 2 years to update the facilities that support research in forestry, mining and minerals, earth sciences and mapping, as well as innovation in energy technology. $82.5 million over the next 2 years for the research, development, and demonstration of clean energy technologies. $62.5 million, again over 2 years, for recharging stations for electric cars and refueling stations for vehicles powered by natural gas and hydrogen. $50 million to invest in technologies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector, and $2.5 million to support regional dialogues and studies that identify the most promising electricity infrastructure projects. It's a lengthy list, but each of those investments is designed to speed Canada's transition to the low-carbon economy of the future. And there's more. We're also investing $128.8 million over 5 years to develop new energy efficiency programs and policies. We want to help Canadians save money as they reduce their environmental footprint. We've committed $81.3 million over 5 years to support marine conservation activities. Budget 2016 also extends the 15% mineral exploration tax credit for another year, and it permits certain costs associated with undertaking environmental studies and community consultations to continue to qualify as Canadian exploration expenses. That's good news for junior mining companies seeking the venture capital they need to finance exploration. It also serves as an incentive to individual investors attracted to the flow-through shares that finance grassroots mineral exploration. Taken all together, it's a game-changing budget that delivers on our promises to Canadians. I would be remiss, though, if I did not point out that Budget 2016 also gives substance to the international commitments we've made over our first 6 months in office, and commitments made at the COP21 climate change talks in Paris last November, at the North American Energy Ministerial I hosted in Winnipeg earlier this year, with the joint statement on climate, energy, and Arctic leadership that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Obama agreed to in Washington last month, and with our pledge as one of the 20 founding countries of Mission Innovation to double government investments in clean energy research and development over the next 5 years, as well as spurring private sector investments in clean technology. For example, Budget 2016 provides for more than $1 billion over 4 years, beginning in 2017-18, to support clean technology. And that includes innovations in the forestry, mining, and energy sectors. We realize that the marketplace will ultimately decide how quickly the global economy goes green, but governments can point the way. We can provide the necessary nudges by pricing carbon, by ending subsidies for fossil fuels over the medium term, and by investing in and supporting the low-carbon, clean growth economy of the future. We can also show leadership by building consensus for major resource projects. That's what our interim approach does for assessing and reviewing major resource projects already in the queue. How? By restoring public confidence in the process, by renewing our nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples through meaningful consultations, by ensuring direct and upstream greenhouse gas emissions linked to a project are considered, by basing regulatory decisions on science and evidence, and by ensuring that this evidence includes traditional Indigenous knowledge. Our government's approval of Woodfiber's proposed liquefied natural gas project near Squamish, British Columbia, is an example of doing things the right way. I'm pleased that Budget 2016 also includes $16.5 million to implement our interim approach over the next 3 years. It's a vote of confidence in our efforts to bring Canadians together, to find common ground, and to ensure Canada's resource industries remain a source of growth, employment, and new opportunities in a world that increasingly values sustainable practices. That's why I've also been hosting roundtables across the country, from Halifax, St. John, and Toronto, to Winnipeg, Calgary, and Vancouver. When you bring industry representatives, Indigenous peoples, and environmental leaders into the same room, often for the first time, you quickly discover there is much more that unites us than separates us. And as I've said before, I have great faith in Canadians and their ingenuity. We are a nation of hard-working, resilient, and visionary people who always seem to rise to the occasion, and I'm convinced we will do so again. Great things are within our grasp for Canada's resource industries, and Budget 2016 will help us achieve them. Through innovative ideas and important investments, we will redefine our resource sectors and reset our economy from generations of prosperity. So I'm here today, Mr. Chair, to seek your support for our spending plans, to invite all of you to work with us, and to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much for your comments. Before I turn it over to questions, Deputy Minister, do you have any comments you'd like to make, or no? Okay,
No.
great. Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to open the floor then to our first 7-minute segment, and that is Mr. Tan.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming and for your statement. The main estimate identify a funding commitment of $969 million for Atomic Energy for Canada Limited, AECL, in this fiscal year. Can the Minister tell us what this money is for?
Well, we want to keep our institutions absolutely safe and modern. There will be refurbishment of facilities. As you know, in this industry, it's paramount important that we keep our facilities in condition that is safe. We believe that these investments will ensure their safety, and we will ensure that there will be monitoring of the way that these funds are spent. We believe that nuclear energy has been very important for Canada. People actually don't understand how important. It's actually a question that sometimes I ask people when the subject comes up, and the question is, well, what percentage of Ontario power generation do you think is nuclear? And when they hear the answer is 62%, they're very surprised. So nuclear energy has been important to our past as Canadians. We want to ensure that we keep up necessary investments so that our facilities are state-of-the-art safe.
Okay, let me come back to this $969 million number again. This number is a big increase comparing to the number of amount of $390 million previous years. Why there's such a big change?
Previously, AECL received funding through a variety of sources at different points in the year, including main and supplementary estimates, payments from Natural Resources Canada, and Treasury Board central votes. And in 2015-16, total government funding to AECL from all sources was close to $640 million. So the government is investing $800 million over 5 years to renew the laboratories, including new and renewed science facilities that will serve the needs of Canadians as well as the industry.
Okay. Right now, the AECL's nuclear site remains the property of government, but it is managed by contractors, by private sectors. How the safety of nuclear operation is maintained by those by this kind of a business model, and what are the AECL's plans and priorities, and who's going to put an eye on those management?
Yeah. As you know, AECL delivers its mandate through a GOCO model whereby the operations of its nuclear laboratories, including decommissioning and waste management work, is delivered by Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Under this model, AECL continues to own the land, facilities, assets, and liabilities, whereas the workforce, the licenses, and all other aspects of the running of the sites are part of Canadian Nuclear Laboratories business. AECL is a small Crown corporation whose role it is to oversee the contract with Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and act as a smart buyer on behalf of the government in order to bring value for money to Canadians.
Okay, you just mentioned that our nuclear industry is a small industry globally. How the ministry is going to work to promote our CANDU technology in the global market, for example, for China?
As a matter of fact, the parliamentary secretary was in China just this past week as part of a Canadian delegation talking about the nuclear industry in Canada. I will have opportunities to travel within the next number of months to Japan for the G7 Energy Ministerial Meeting, and then later in June to the G20 Ministerial Meeting in Beijing. And we will be very attentive to the opinion of others, our partners around the world, on the state of the industry, Canada's role in it, and the future potential for Canada to be an important player.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fine. Okay, I understand Ms. Stubbs, you're next.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you both Minister and Mr. Hamilton for being here with us today. I'd just like to focus my time on the National Energy Board. So, Minister, as you know, of course, the budget for the NEB increased this year compared to the 2015-16 main estimates. It was due to an increase of $18.3 million specifically for energy transportation infrastructure from the previous government's 2015 budget. And in fact, of course, the previous Conservative government committed $80 million over 5 years to the NEB to contribute to safety and environmental protection and to enhance engagement with Canadians related to transportation infrastructure. The funding was intended to be fully cost recovered from industry. Now, recently you, as you noted in your opening comments, and the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change announced new transitional pipeline review measures that are in addition to the existing NEB process. Of course, we know proponents of Canada's world-leading and sustainable natural resources projects have invested millions of dollars in what they believed was a predictable, responsible, and robust approval process. Now, your government is changing the rules of them mid-project, which is perpetuating uncertainty and instability at, I think we can all agree, the very worst time. The previous government, through their significant investment in Budget 2015, signaled to industry and to Canadians that safety and environmental protection and enhanced engagement on energy transportation infrastructure are important issues that demand appropriate investment from the federal government, and they delivered on that. So I just have some questions for you relating to the NEB and your government's intention. I'll ask them all at once. Does your government intend to continue the $80 million investment in the NEB announced last year by the former government? And if not, what will your investment be and how will it assist the board in doing their work? 2, given your government's insistence that an extra review process is necessary, in addition to the great work of the NEB, I just wonder, does the chair and the experts at the NEB have the confidence of your government, yes or no? And 3, also, do you plan on making any management changes to the NEB, given your government's ambiguity over confidence in their work and the need for an additional process?
The answer to the first question is yes. The funding that was announced will be maintained. The answer to the second question is that the government has confidence in the chair of the National Energy Board. We also understand that we have a mandate from Canadians to reform the National Energy Board. That's something that we have started to do already in 2 phases. The transition phase will include those 5 principles that you know very well, and that when it comes time to the Energy East pipeline to be assessed by the National Energy Board, we have agreed that we will appoint a number of temporary commissioners to help the board in its work to assess that very long and complicated project. I must say, Mr. Chair, that just before our question period today, the member from Grand Prairie Mackenzie, in his member's statement, asked the government to approve the Energy East pipeline. This is before the application has been lodged with the regulator. And that is part of our problem. If there are members of Parliament who want the government to make decisions on major energy projects, even before those projects have been assessed by the regulator, it's no wonder that Canadians have lost confidence in the regulatory process. Our ambition is the same as the ambition for the member from Lisgar, and the same as the ambition, Portage-Lisgar, and the same as the ambitions of members of her caucus. And that is to move our natural resources to tidewater and to market sustainably. This is what we all want. But to assume that that decision can be made by government before the regulator has even looked at the application is part of the reasons why we're having to reform the regulatory process. So that is how we will reform the NEB in the short term. In the long term, we have a mandate to reform the environmental assessment process in Canada. That will be a responsibility of the Minister of the Environment, Climate Change, and the Minister of Natural Resources. We'll be working together. We will be consulting Canadians. And very importantly, we will be consulting members of this committee. We will be posing the question, if you had to create a Canadian regulator from scratch, what would it look like? What would the principles be that would determine the structure? What would the legislation that we would ask Parliament to pass consist of? What would the values be? So, and what is the relationship ultimately between the government and the regulator? So that is the longer-term reform of the NEB. The process that we have introduced now seeks to establish a broader consensus across the country.
So just to clarify one of the points you just made, so after the reform and the changes you say you want to make to the NEB, because obviously you don't trust the process or the experts there, then you want to appoint temporary commissioners to help the board after the proponents have made it all the way through the additional layers and costs you're going to add? Like, how does that indicate that you actually trust the evidence-based decision-making of the experts at the NEB if you also want to appoint temporary commissioners to so-called, as you just said, help them?
We will appoint the temporary commissioners during the assessment process of the National Energy Board once the application from the proponent has been lodged with the regulator. That hasn't happened yet.
Who are they?
We haven't appointed them yet.
What will the appointment process be?
Well, we've announced
we've
announced a new system of appointments. It will be available for parliamentarians to see. We think that there are values to appoint temporary members of the National Energy Board to ensure that the diversity of the country is represented, to ensure that Indigenous cultural practices are part of the review. And those will be the qualities and the skills that we'll be looking for when the appointments are made.
What will be the timeline for the appointments?
I would say that those appointments would be made sometime after the proponent has lodged the application to the National Energy Board. That hasn't happened yet. You know that there was an attempt to do that, but the National Energy Board sent 30,000 pages back because the National Energy Board said that it was too complicated even for their experts. So I'm presuming that there's some editing going on right now. And once the editing is done and the National Energy Board sees the application, then the clock begins to tick on the timelines that will govern the Energy East review process. And sometime during that period, we will give the National Energy Board more resources to do its job effectively.
A good segue, Minister. The clock is ticking. I apologize. We're going to have to move on. Ms. Stubbs, over to you, Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for coming here once again. I'll start by asking about the Ring of Fire. I notice in the estimates, again, there was no mention at all for funding to support the Ring of Fire. Neither was there any mention of it in the budget. The province of Ontario has called for matching funds of $1 billion for infrastructure to unlock this potential. So where is this government's support for this huge development for the future of Northern Ontario? And why is your ministry abandoning this region that's been hurting for so long?
I wouldn't describe it as abandonment. I would describe it as a keen interest in the priorities that the Government of Ontario advances to Canada for spending infrastructure dollars based on the principle of provinces setting priorities. And it's a very timely question because just within the last week, I've had conversations with Minister Gravel from the Government of Ontario and with Grand Chief Day about the Ring of Fire project. And what I said to them, I'll say publicly now and to the committee, that when the Government of Ontario wants to approach Canada about what its priorities are for infrastructure spending, and if it is a priority of the Government of Ontario working with Indigenous communities, then the Government of Canada would be very pleased to sit down with Ontario and those communities to determine the best way forward.
Okay. After going through these estimates and having gone through the budget presented 2 weeks ago, you know, it looks like much of the so-called new money for clean energy in budget 2016 is actually just filling holes left by the Conservatives and replacing sunsetted funds. There doesn't seem to be any new or change of direction here, let alone any real change. How do you account for this?
I can't account for lack of change, but I can reiterate the depth of change that's in this budget that I reviewed during my remarks, and I'd be glad to talk about now. Significant investments in green infrastructure, significant investments in alternate sources of energy, in electric vehicles and in stations that will recharge those vehicles, major investments in innovation right across the government, investments even in the oil sands of Alberta to build on some of the very good work that has already been established by the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, COSIA, that really is a model among those countries who seek to work together to increase their competitiveness internationally, who put aside intellectual property issues, who work as an industry, and they have invested, I think the figure is $1.3 billion, I think it's in over 800 projects, in order to advance the interests of Canada's oil and gas sector together without any attention being paid to what might be an advantage for a particular company. So there's plenty in this budget that goes beyond what past budgets have committed, and it also looks to incentivize the private sector. We have a belief in the ingenuity, the innovative power, and the entrepreneurship of Canada's resource sector. And we have seen it time and time again. I had the pleasure of speaking to the Prospector and Developers Association meeting. The Minister from Portage Lisgar was there. And we were reminded yet again that Canada leads the world in sustainable development in mining. So we are investing in sustainable mining development as well. So the answer to your question, how is this budget different from all other budgets? I would say significantly in ways that are consistent with the campaign commitments we made to the Canadian people, consistent with the mandate letters given to us by the Prime Minister, and I think also consistent with what many of those sitting on the other side of the House would agree to be common national objectives.
And also we see, in terms of forestry, in the forest sector, we see sunsetting of a number of programs and initiatives, including the forest innovation and expanding market opportunities and investments in forest industry transformation. And none of these were mentioned in your budget. And in fact, there doesn't seem to be any dedicated funding for forestry. You know, given the hard times that the sector has faced now for a long time, I was just at the Council of Forest Industries meeting in Kelowna last week, and I heard a lot about this. What are your plans beyond these initiatives? You know, what help can this important sector that's so important to so many provinces and communities expect going forward?
We're expanding Market Opportunities Program by delivering $29.4 million over 2 years to increase offshore exports, the use of wood in non-residential and mid-rise construction in North America, and to support environmental reputation through science. NRCan funds a maximum of 50% of the majority of activities. The Forest Innovation Program is delivering $56.8 million over 2 years to support emerging and breakthrough technologies in bioenergy, nanotechnology, and next-generation forest products. Those are two examples. Investments in forest industry transformation with $190.4 million available between 2010 and 2018. This accelerates the commercialization of highly innovative first-in-kind technology at Canadian forest facilities. Also, there is a $1 million investment in the Aboriginal Forestry Initiative. And as you know, the Prime Minister met with President Obama in the White House on March the 12th and began a high-level conversation about renewing the softwood lumber agreement, asking officials to report back within 100 days. So For these and many other reasons, we are moving on the forestry front. We realize how essential the forestry sector is to Canada and will continue to be.
Red on the button. Mr. Sade, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for coming to the committee again today. I hear my colleagues talking a lot about the impact of low oil pricing as having in Alberta and parts of the country. Northern Ontario and Canadian communities are also concerned about the drop in mineral pricing. According to Stats Canada, the job numbers last week showed Sudbury was the highest unemployment rate in Ontario and the second highest in Canada. So the people in Northern Ontario are also concerned about the missing opportunities that we're having with the Ring of Fire and the tremendous opportunity that this has, one of the most promising developments in the Canadian mining industry in the last 100 years. So we've had companies like Noront, KWG Resources are really pleased with the budget in 2016, as you mentioned earlier, as we've made significant investments with municipalities in infrastructure, education, capacity building with First Nations. So we're really, and the Ontario government is really pleased to have finally a partner at the table for resource-based initiatives like this. So my question to you is, when we look at the government's support for the Ring of Fire, for the mining industry, and also related to the investment of innovation and research for the forestry, mining, and all the resource base also on the R&D.
I'm glad you asked that question because I can take a little bit more time to complete my answer from the previous question. Because forestry, as a part of a series of natural resource sectors, also qualifies for additional investment over time. For example, $1 billion over 4 years, starting in 2017-18, to support clean technology in the forestry, fisheries, mining, energy, and agricultural sectors as part of the innovation agenda, and also $87.2 million over 2 years for Natural Resources Canada projects across the country that support research in forestry, mining, and minerals, earth sciences and mapping, and innovation in energy technology. I also want to say, and we try to make this a part of every answer we give to questions about low commodity prices, we know that they impact families and individuals. We know that there is hardship when commodity prices are as low as they are, and we know that in Alberta, times are tougher than they have been in a very long time. We're attentive to the statistics, but they're more than that. They have human consequences. And that's why the government is responding through transfers, through infrastructure investment, through changes to employment insurance, through these investments in new technologies that will ultimately rely on the innovative skill and, I would say, entrepreneurial genius of so many in Alberta who have built that economy and who will rebuild it again. So many of the investments are across the sectors of NRCan's responsibilities and the government, including forestry, mining, and oil and gas.
Also, wanted to ask too, from an infrastructure perspective, when we look at the investment that is needed in railway and the roads to bring to market products. So how important it is, because our previous government had indicated that the roads and railway had to be funded completely by the private sector. So what is our role? And we've had a budget that has looked at significant investments across Canada for roads and infrastructure. How important is that to then be able to access the mineral deposits like the Ring of Fire and other deposits that are in remote areas?
We're committed to funding infrastructure across the country. You know that these announcements will be made in a phased-in way. with certain priorities linked to those projects that are ready to go. You also know that the priorities of the Government of Canada will be linked directly to the priorities of the provinces and the municipalities. We have become far more flexible in the application of that funding formula. In the case where municipalities are unable to be equal partners, we will be partners with provinces at a 50-50 basis. So that is where we take our cue. We understand that the local priorities are the ones that matter most. Those are the problems that we want to help solve. Those are the investments we want to make with our partners in the provinces. And I would think that the Government of Canada would be keen to look at those priorities that are consistent with knitting together national transportation infrastructure, especially green infrastructure.
Thank you. You're good? Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Barlow, over to you. We're now into the 5-minute round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I appreciate your time. And I just wanted to ask, looking through the mains, and quote the Finance Minister from his budget speech: "Wherever the sun shines and the wind blows, farmers and landowners can become energy producers, particularly for rural regions hurt by falling commodity prices. The opportunities for economic diversification are enormous." Now, as much as that is not the greatest comment on what farmers and ranchers and rural Canadians do, to me it sends a message that you're going to be looking at renewable energy as a way to diversify Canada's economy, which I think is something that all of us here would agree is something worthwhile. However, when I look at the mains that you brought out, a decrease in $93 million in the Clean Air Agenda program, $70.6 million cut from the energy efficiency practices and lower carbon energy sources, another $21.8 million from the Eco Energy for Biofuels Producer Initiative, $13.6 million cut in the Wind Power Production Incentive Program, and an 85% cut in the Responsible Natural Resource Management Program, a decrease of $163.5 million. To me, this sends a mixed message. If you are going to delay projects like Energy East, and I'm not saying that we want to rubber stamp it tomorrow, it has to go through the program, but you have said you are going to delay it. If you want us to look at other ways to make up the loss of these jobs and these 100,000 in Alberta alone, and you have been saying that we're going to look at renewables as a way for these jobs to be found, and yet you're making substantial cuts to programs that help fund and innovate renewable energy programs.
Actually, those are sunsetted programs, funding of which has been replaced by initiatives in budget 2016-17. So these are not cuts of investments in those areas. There are 5-year tranches of funds that ran out in March of 2016. Therefore, it shows a reduction in funding. However, they have been replaced by new commitments and new investments in similar and additional projects in budget 2016 and 17. And, I don't want to take your time. Go ahead.
No, can you give a couple of examples of how what new programs are going to be available?
Yes, I've done that already. I could give you other examples of investments in green infrastructure, in innovation, in electric vehicle storage, that when you total it is in hundreds of millions of dollars of new investment, replacing some of the sunsetted programs to which you have just referred.
Okay, thank you. Just another question. You talked about some of these programs that are going to be changing. We talked about I know Mr. Tam brought up as well the Atomic Energy Canada Limited, and this is the first year nuclear sites will be managed under a government-owned, contractor-operated model. This restructuring is reflected with massive increases in the estimates from $119 million in 2015-2016 to $968 million in 2016-17. This is an increase of about $850 million. What is the reason for this restructuring, and what will be the benefits of it?
AECL is receiving $969 million in the 2016-17 main estimates that will allow AECL to carry out its mandate of managing Canada's radioactive waste and decommissioning responsibilities and enable nuclear science and technology. Increased funding in 16-17 will allow AECL to advance the decommissioning and remediation of old and contaminated infrastructure and sites, and to revitalize the infrastructure at the Chalk River Laboratories. The government is investing $800 million over 5 years to renew those laboratories, including new and renewed science facilities that will serve the needs of Canadians as well as industry.
Just a really quick question. What criteria was used when you were looking at some of these programs to determine which programs would be getting increases and which programs would either not be renewed or were seeing decreases?
That's a really good question. And I remember going back to my days as a legislator in Manitoba a very long time ago, 1988 to 1992, when I was in opposition. And I always thought it made total sense to every year at budget time pose the question, is a program working? If it's not working, how can we make it work? And if we can't, then we should stop funding it. And that's the prism through which I look at all public expenditures. I mean, we have to be able to convince the people who brought us here and the people who fund these programs that they're being run effectively. And that, I think, and my several months' experience as minister tells me that our senior public servants believe that to be a value and an important one of prudent budgeting as well. So I think the way you go about it is you assess the impact, the effectiveness, and whether or not it's justified renewal. In the case that we've been talking about over the last 10 minutes or so, some funds have been sunset, so the department looked at the best way to renew them, learning from the experiences over the last 5 years, so that new dollars can be spent more effectively, more efficiently, in part on the strength of what we've learned from what happened the 5 years previous. So I'm with you. You know, there really ought to be a way of examining rationally why we're spending any dollars that the taxpayers... Pardon me?
Results-based budgeting, kind of what you're talking about?
That's the way I see it.
Yeah,
that's my inclination. I spent 16 years as president of the Business Council of Manitoba. I have a respect for the importance of making sure that the money that's spent is spent efficiently and in the best possible way. And I have every reason to believe that the fine public servants of NRCan agree with that.
Thank you, Minister. We went a little bit over time there, but that's okay. Mr. Harvey, over to you.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Minister, for attending today. In your opening remarks, you indicated in that Budget 2016 proposed funding for clean technology projects. And I'd like to cite a specific paragraph on page 7. For example, Budget 2016 provides more than $1 billion over 4 years, beginning 2017-18, to support clean technology, and that includes innovations in forestry, mining, and energy sectors. So my question is, can you elaborate on how this investment in these specific pillars will spur innovation in each of those given sectors?
This will be a cross-government initiative. We'll be working very closely with Minister Baines and Minister McKenna across government to make sure that the innovation investment is directed to where we think it can do the most good. And if you look at the mandate letters that were sent to those ministers by the Prime Minister, you will see that there is a very important cross-government commitment to innovation in general, and in particular to clean, green growth. And we will be working with the private sector. We will actually be asking for proposals from the private sector to work with us. We don't assume that government has all the right answers on how these investments should be made. We do assume that those investments will be more impactful if we work in partnership with those people who are devising some of the innovation, who are implementing some of the innovation. So you will find that over the next number of months and the next number of years, this government will be reaching out to the innovators, to the entrepreneurs, so that we can work together in both the public and the private sectors to make a difference. By the way, on that very point, you know that 20 prime ministers and presidents from around the world signed Mission Innovation in Paris. I think November 30th was the date, which commits those 20 governments to doubling their investment in clean technologies. But there's also a private sector component. International billionaires, such as Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, have also committed themselves to put together a group of private investors who will join the public sector globally to make sure that we can lever these investments up. And the same thing is implicit in the commitments that we've made in this budget and the ways in which we will reach out across the sectors to entrepreneurs and innovators to make sure that we're getting maximum leverage for the money that we spend through the taxpayer.
Okay. I guess my next question is, you referenced in your opening remarks you're crisscrossing the country and speaking with industry stakeholders, Indigenous leaders, environmental groups, community leaders, provincial leaders, of course. So my question is, and specifically around this year's budget, what do these stakeholders in these given backgrounds have to say about your plan for natural resource development and specifically innovation in clean tech that you've presented?
The response has been very positive for the most part. And people understand that we ran on a campaign platform of investments in Canadian people and in the Canadian economy, that we've delivered on those investments. You will always have disagreement among people who think that more should have gone here and less should have gone over there. But generally speaking, the response that I have received in our office and in my travels across the country is that people think we're on the right track. We also don't assume that we have all the right answers or all the best ideas. And that's why we listen to ways in which we can improve the investments that we've announced and the investments that we will make. So I think a hallmark of this government is not only its interest in reaching out to those who have good ideas, in some cases better ideas, but even to be aggressive about it. And that's the way we were in the pre-budget consultation, and that's the way we'll be as we invite ideas from the private sector, from other governments, and from Canadians to take this template of Budget 16 and make it better and stronger.
Unless you can get a question and answer in 20 seconds,
That's okay.
Maybe we'll move on. Okay. All right, thanks. Ms. Bergen, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Minister, for being here. I'm going to change topics a little bit. There's been obviously a lot of talk and there's a lot of investment, a lot of attention from this government on so-called clean energy and green energy. And we all support that, but the evidence and the experts tell us that fossil fuel consumption will be increasing over the foreseeable future, probably over the next 40 years. It will be increasing. With that in mind, I don't want to assume anything, and so I want to ask you if you believe that if the world is going to be using fossil fuels, I would assume you would agree with me that it should be the most responsibly extracted and transported. You're nodding your head, so I'm assuming you agree with that. Would you agree that Canadian oil is the most responsibly and is extracted, comparatively speaking, in the most cleanest and responsible way? Would you be would you be able to say that in all honesty, in your heart of hearts? Do you believe that?
Well, I wouldn't rely on my heart or my opinion. I would rely on the investments of the COSIA Group, who are experts in the sector and in the industry, who are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to improve their processes. So if you were to ask them the question you just asked me, their answer almost certainly would be, we can do better. And we are doing better. So your question was, are we extracting fossil fuels in the most responsible way possible? I would say that there are others in the sector who are saying there are more responsible ways, there are better ways. That's why we're investing in those technologies. And they seek, as much as anybody else, to make sure that the way in which we extract our natural resources are as sensibly done as possible.
So in your role as Minister of Natural Resources, one of your jobs is to talk about natural resources around the world and to talk about our specifically our oil and energy sector. And so with that in mind, would you feel confident when you were abroad, are you able to tell potential customers that Canadian oil is responsibly extracted. And you might know there's actually quite a campaign going on right now in Alberta. Oil Respect is one of the campaigns. There's a number of campaigns that want to dispel the myths and the rap that Alberta oil has gotten from around the world, and even from some. I mean, we just saw it in Edmonton, of all places, this past weekend, where Alberta oil was getting a bad rap from certain people in certain ways of thinking. You, as a Minister of Natural Resources, are you able to, with confidence, based on the evidence, based on Canada, our human rights record, our labour laws, comparing us to other oil producers in the world, are you able to promote Canadian oil abroad? Do you have the confidence, as the Minister of Natural Resources, in the way our oil is extracted and transported?
I've had the pleasure over the last number of weeks to give keynote speeches at the CERAWeek conference in Houston and at the Bloomberg conference in New York City just last week. And at the same time, I was meeting with investment bankers, those who were looking at Canada for what they believe to be its stable politics, its growing economy, its reliability as a partner, who are expressing their keen interest in investing in Manitoba and Canada. And I have no problem talking to the international community about ways in which Canadians believe that we can always improve processes, and I give examples of...
Exactly. No. I think we're...
No, I understand
I
your
absolutely
question.
agree. Yeah, it would appear, and I don't think it's just me. I think investors, the money is showing investors are looking for not only a stable political environment, but they're looking for a political environment that believes in its own natural resources. So I want to switch topics again and go back to your announcement, which was news to me, that, just to clarify, after Energy East submits its application to the National Energy Board, at that point you will be appointing three new members to the NEB, who will then be part of the NEB only during the Energy East application process. Is that accurate, or are you going to clarify that?
They're temporary members of the National Energy Board whose job will be assigned to them by the chair of the National Energy Board. That is not the job of the Government of Canada. And the chair of the National Energy Board will determine the best way to deploy this increased capacity of the board to do its job. And that will happen sometime after the application has been lodged. It won't be a long time after that, and it will enable the National Energy Board to do a better job than it could do if it didn't have these additional temporary members.
And that will only
Thank
be
you.
for
Actually,
Energy East?
we're over our time.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. McLeod, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to point out, first of all, that I'm really happy to see the amount of consultation that this government is doing with people from across Canada, and I'm really happy to see that your department is engaging in the roundtable discussions on the different areas of Canada. My experience in Northwest Territories is that the projects that the companies and the projects that involve the communities and the people and communicate the best always have the best success rate. And the Indigenous people from across Canada are certainly expecting meaningful engagement on all fronts, and that doesn't exclude economic projects. And they want to be part of all parts of a resource project, from construction through the operation, through the cleanup. They want to be part of the training design and opportunities, as well as the employment opportunities. And the communities that are close to resource development also have very high expectations regarding their participation in and deriving benefits from resource projects, employment through ownership opportunities. How does this government, more specifically your department, plan to help addressing this?
The most important value for me and lesson learned is that the relationship Indigenous people have with the land and the water is a generational relationship. That when we approach a discussion about what to do with our resources that run through Indigenous land, we hear time and time again that it has been generations of ancestors who have delivered the land and the water to us, and that we have an obligation in our time to leave the land as we have found it, or better, to the generations who come after us. And this is a wisdom and a perspective of understanding the relationship between the human and the land that gives us water, that gives us food, that gives us life itself, that is very special. And if proponents of major energy projects were imbued with that sensitivity, with that clarity, and can understand that trusting relationships don't begin the day before you seek approval of a project and don't end the day after the project has been approved, but are relationships that extend years and in some cases generations. So it is that meaningful consultation about values and about the power of culture and the relationship with the land and the water that will have to be an essential part of any approval process that we take moving forward in Canada. So that to me is one of the principal values at stake as we move forward. And I also know in my conversations with Indigenous leaders across the country that they want economic development opportunities for their children. You know, they want their kids to have the same aspirations that mine have, the same educational opportunities that mine have had, the same apprenticeship chances, the same professional aspirations that we find in all of our young people wherever we go in Canada, and that natural resource projects are economic development drivers. And they want to be partners as we drive our natural resource economy forward, with the very special understanding that we can't do it with that relationship with the land and the water.
Thank you for that response. In the north, we have very high unemployment. We have in some communities up to 60% unemployment, a lot of social issues, but at the same time we have a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of potential in terms of resource development, and a lot of mines are seeking, doing some exploration in the area. People are wanting to be reassured that the regulatory process works well, the environment's protected, but they also want to see that the benefits are there for projects that are close to the communities. We still see a lot of fly-in workers coming from all parts of Canada and the world coming to work at the mines and the oil and gas projects. How would you encourage companies to give enough front notice so that communities can prepare themselves? We have generations of people that were not employed before, so we need to be able to start opportunity as soon as we recognize it. So,
I believe that companies are getting better and better with experience, with some setbacks, some successes. I believe that those relationships are developing and they are deepening, as they must do if we're going to be moving on together. So it's up to the companies as they prepare their applications and the regulator as those applications are assessed to know that the evidence that we are assessing as a government includes the evidence of Indigenous cultural background and values. So I am quite optimistic through my conversations with industry leaders and at these roundtables that we were talking about a few minutes ago, at which Indigenous leaders, environmental activists, and industry leaders are together for a number of hours, and sometimes they've never spent any time together. What they're hearing about cultural practice might be for the first time, or not expressed in a far more eloquent way than I can by those who feel the generational importance of these natural resource projects and decisions. So I think that Canadians, if we can generalize, are open, are diverse in our backgrounds, but we embrace difference. And I'm hopeful that the kinds of differences that you and I are articulating now will be seen as a strength for the country and a strength for the resource sector in Canada.
Minister, thank you very much. We're going a little bit over time, but Mr. Cannings, you have 3 minutes, and I'm going to adhere to it strictly. So,
Okay, quickly, I'll just, with that time limit, I just wanted to quickly follow up. We finished my questions talking, you were talking about the softwood lumber agreement. I was, as I say, just at the Council of Forest Industries and talked to a Global Affairs Canada representative there about, and she pointed out that Canada's position was more or less ready to go. And I just wondered what you might be able to tell us about that position, considering how things are quite different now than they were when we last set this agreement.
Minister Freeland has been crisscrossing the country talking to industry coast to coast to coast, and she has a very good understanding of the various points of view that are being expressed. And by the way, it's not one point of view, as you know better than I do, especially in that world. But it's the job of the Government of Canada to adopt a negotiating position which, on balance and in all the circumstance, is the best position for Canada to put forward. We also know that this is a tricky file. We know that it's important to have the influence and the buy-in of the President and the Prime Minister. We saw evidence of that in Washington on March the 12th. There is now a mandate to officials to come back within 100 days. And our department acts as a support for Minister Freeland as she begins to negotiate with the United States. We'll stay close to her. And I would like to stay close to you and other members of Parliament who have important financial stake, industrial capacity in the forest industries in your parts of the country, so that we're sure that we're putting the best position forward on behalf of Canada.
all right. Minister, thank you very much for indulging us. We went a little bit over time, but we're very grateful for you making the time again. In the span of 2 short months, you've been kind enough to appear twice, so we very much appreciate that. So on that note, we're going to suspend the meeting for a minute, and then we're going to carry on. Okay, we're going to end at quarter after 5. Yeah. Okay, everybody, we're going to carry on here, the second part of the meeting. We have Deputy Minister Hamilton, who has been kind enough to hang around, and he's joined by the Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, Corporate Management Services Sector, Cami Ramcharan. Did I get all that right? Okay. All right. I get a medal for that or something. It's a long title. Okay, so it's 20 to 5 now. We have to conclude by 5:30, and I'm told we need about 15 minutes to vote on the estimates. So what I propose to do is carry on in our normal format, but cut it off at 5:15 unless anybody objects. Hearing no objections, okay. So shall we go straight to questions? Okay, all right. So that being the case, Mr. Lemieux, over to you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos deux témoins.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses. One of the questions that was proposed by the Library of Parliament that I found particularly interesting, and I'm going to read it to you, is that this year's main estimates proposes an increase of $14.1 million for the Forestry Industry Transformation Program. That was created in 2010 to support Canada's forest sector in becoming more economically competitive and environmentally sustainable. The program was renewed in February 2014 with an additional $90.4 million over 4 years. The renewal is intended to help bring the next wave of innovation to market and solidify Canada's position as a leader in forest industry transformation. So what is the breakdown of the renewed IFIT's $90.4 million of the program's 4-year duration? Thank you for the question. That program is very important for the forestry sector. Insofar as the breakdown of this change, well, I'm going to ask Cami to explain it. But this program is one of a number of programs in this sector to assist the sector in getting back on its feet after the 2008-2009 period, when the sector had to restructure and modify its production methods and even the products that it offers. I think this is an example of a program offered by Natural Resources Canada that's been a great success, and as part of this renewal that is sweeping the sector, we will continue in future. This type of program will be our objective. After all, it's a catalyst for innovation in the sector, not only for the forestry sector, but also for other sectors in the area of natural resources. And now I will ask Cami to give you the breakdown.
So it's the industry forestry information and innovation technology, and what it's doing is really bringing some technology to market. The breakdown, we normally go between our regular operating and our grants and contributions. And so in the first year, in 16-17, we'll have roughly $2 million just on our operating funds, and then in grants and contributions, roughly about $35 million. So that's kind of the profile that it takes over the next 4 years, to a very, very small amount to help the operations, and the large percentage of it that would be in G's and C's. So the majority of the overall $90 million that we have, I would say a large percentage, if not 90% of the amounts are for our grants and contributions.
En fait, ça me soulevait une nouvelle interrogation.
And that leads me to a further question. When it comes to the concept of model forest created by the Canada Forest Services, which was proposed in 2012 at the Rio de Janeiro summit. Since then, about 15 of these model forests have been created in Canada and have been financially supported by the federal government. in a program that existed between 92 and 2014. The program was cancelled in 2014, and now there are only 8 of these model forests left. Does the government intend to relaunch that program? I can't speak for the government in the area of specific policies, but I will ask our ADM Glenn Mason, who's responsible for the forestry sector, to describe what the program was like in the past. But insofar as the future is concerned, well, the government has to make those policy decisions. But I will ask him to give you a bit more detail about what the program was like.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. You're right in saying that the program was created in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. We supported the program for years. But after a certain period of time, the money available for the program was decreased during the last cycle of government cuts. However, we continue to support the international network, like the Secretariat.
The international program continues to grow spontaneously. There's about 59 of these model forests around the world, but we no longer fund them domestically.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Reste encore un peu de temps?
You've got, you can have 1 more minute.
OK. La semaine dernière, le gouvernement...
Last week, the Quebec government announced its energy policy. It's given pride of place to green fuel and green energy. The program encourages investment in renewable energy, and there used to be an incentive for biofuels at the federal level, but that ended in March 2016. What will be the repercussions of the end of these programs on the availability and the accessibility of biofuels to replace fossil fuels in Canada? It is true. You are right in saying that that program is now ended. But as for the future, the government is responsible for the creation of new programs. As the minister stated, $1 billion over the next 4 years will be invested in clean tech and other types of alternative technologies in the area, in the energy sector. We're currently beginning to consult experts in the area to renew those programs. And perhaps there will be some money, some programs for biofuels, but perhaps not. We'll see. What's certain is that there will be a great deal of investment in cutting-edge technology for alternative energy technologies. And it's up to the government to decide whether it wants biofuels to be part of those programs or not. But the program that was formerly in place has now reached its end date, and we are going to move forward with our priorities in the area of alternative fuels. That was mentioned in the budget, and we're going to move forward. After the consultation period, we will decide on our new policies and programs.
Thank you. Ms. Stubbs, over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. So I asked the Minister about the NEB, and I'd just like to follow up with you for clarity and specifics on that issue, if it is possible. I just wanted to start regarding the Minister's claim about a perceived lack of confidence in the review process. I'd just like to ask what evidence there is that this is indeed the case, what facts were used to determine that these transitional review measures are needed, and how will they actually change or improve the work of the NEB. So, for example, of course, we all know upstream greenhouse gas emissions are already assessed by provinces. This is a standard that doesn't apply to any other infrastructure project in any other sector. There aren't any specifics around when the Crown has recently failed its duty to consult First Nations. So I'd just like to understand how the government got to the position that these new transitional measures were needed and what the actual impact on the NEB work will be. And in the case of the temporary commissioners, why are they needed? What will be the process, the timeline, the cost, and the parameters around their selection? And will there be new temporary commissioners appointed for every new project application that goes through the NEB process?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think in a couple of those questions, you're asking me to say, why did the government decide to do this? Why did the government decide to do that? And rather than respond to that, since I'm part of the public service, I can explain to you some of the things that I understand that people are saying and why the government might have chosen to do what it did. Certainly, as we looked at the pipelines and other projects that have been proposed in recent years, there certainly has been a lot of debate and opposition, and people have been questioning whether we have a good process in place or not. And so the government, as part of what it decided to do, said, well, we're going to review the environmental assessment process, and we're going to look at it and see, is it as good as it should be? Are there some things that we should change as we go forward to inspire greater confidence in the system? That review will start, but it's going to take some time. And what we said is, that's good to do that, but we actually have projects that are in front of us right now. And so the government decided to put in place an interim strategy, which said, using the 5 principles, this is what we will do now while the review is underway. And it was principles, as you know, things like science-based evidence, greater consultation. And I think that's one of the issues that we have seen in reactions that we get, is there's a need for greater involvement of communities, Indigenous communities as well as others, involved in these major pipelines and projects. So we have put that in place, and that will apply until any new regime comes about. And certainly the key projects that are in front of us right now, or some of the key ones, are the Energy East pipeline, Trans Mountain pipeline out west, Pacific Northwest project, and other LNG projects. So we have a number there that we have to decide, what do we do? And in the government, in its interim policy, decided to say, for those 2 pipelines, Trans Mountain and Energy East, we will extend the time to make the decision to allow greater consultation. In the TMX process, the NEB part of it is almost over, and we would normally give 3 months for the government to make its decision based on the NEB report. We said we'll give another 4 months, so that takes it out to probably the end of December this year. On the Energy East, it hasn't started yet, as the minister indicated, and so there's more time to change the process and do different things. And so one of the things that will be done is that for the period that the NEB is reviewing it, the government will appoint 3 or 4, I guess the number hasn't been determined, additional temporary members, which is allowed under the legislation. And then the chair of the NEB will decide what those people are to do. And they could be involved in extra consultations along the route on the project itself, or whatever the chair decides. But it's an opportunity to have more consultation, perhaps more balance in the makeup of the NEB people looking at this project, and that will go on. And as part of the interim policy, that period was extended as well. And then the government will take a bit more time as well for its decision. So that's how the interim policy will play out for those 2. pipelines. And I think your last question had to do with whether there will be new members appointed for every project. Hard to say right now whether that will be the case. And I would just say that this interim policy is in place while the government consults on what to do with the environmental assessment process more generally, what to do about modernizing the NEB. These are measures that are in place until that's done, so not clear whether there'll be other interim or temporary members put in place for other projects.
I just wonder if you know, will the parameters and the determinants for the temporary appointments be made available publicly?
My understanding is that these appointments will be made consistent with the government's new appointment policy that has been laid out about a month ago or in the past few weeks. And so we will be making these appointments, or the government will be making these appointments consistent with those, which is, by what I understand, a very transparent process. So I'm expecting that there will be lots of public information. And typically, when we make an appointment for big appointments like this, there would be a advertised process. And so I'm expecting that there will be for this, in which case people can see what the parameters of the job will be.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Cannings, over to you.
Well, thank you. In your department's report on plans and priorities, it shows planned spending on a category or program called Energy Efficient Practices and Lower Carbon Energy Sources. It shows that funding will decline by more than $130 million between fiscal 2013-14 and next year. And that's a reduction of 40%. And I just want to know how much of this gap will be addressed by budget 2016, and how does planned funding in the budget compare with the resources that were spent in 2013-14? Right now, the estimates for 2016-17 are 183 million, and that's a big decline. So I just wondered how the budget will address that shortfall.
So, as the minister indicated in his remarks, what we have happening this year is there were a number of programs that sunsetted or ended at the end of 2015-16, and they were in a basket called Clean Air Agenda or something to that effect, and it was energy efficiency, clean technology, and those programs were set up over a 5-year period, and they were scheduled to expire at the end of last month. Every time that a government has that kind of a situation, they have to make a decision about whether we continue those, we increase them, we decrease them. And what we've seen in this budget, 2016, is that in the area of energy efficiency, which you've raised, is there's been a commitment to spend $129 million over 5 years in the area of energy efficiency. So that's, in a sense, a renewal or a continuation of those energy efficiency programs. In the area of clean technology, there was some additional money in this budget. There was some green infrastructure money for charging stations for electric vehicles, for example. There were some things there, but there was also, as the minister indicated, another $1 billion set aside without a specific program beside it to look at clean technology investments in the natural resource area, as well as other sectors going forward. So some of what's going to continue over the next 5-year period is going to be decided based on consultations that we'll be having over the course of the coming months, and conceivably could be set out in, say, the next budget. So that there were programs that were in place. Some of the funding has gone forward. Some is going to be subjected to further consultation to see how best to spend that money. Other examples of things that were continued and renewed was money spent on adaptation. There were programs in place for that, and that's continued. For our international climate change negotiations. So I haven't given you an exact comparison of, you may have noticed, between what's going to be spent over the next 5 years versus what was spent in 2013-14. I can endeavor to try to get you that answer, unless Cammie has it right at her disposal, which she might, because she's the CFO.
And I do have a little bit of details for you. So just in terms of the overall difference between the 15-16 mains and the 16-17 mains, roughly 70.6. Many of it is, as Deputy Minister Hamilton has mentioned, related to the Clean Air Agenda, which was roughly about 30 million we'll be seeing coming back into that area of spending this current fiscal year. The other two areas where we've had a little bit of a decrease, and it really is related to our funding profile for these programs. We don't have funding profiles that are always constant throughout the entire program. They ramp up and then they ramp down. One of those programs that's ramping down is the Eco Energy for Biofuels, and its funding profile is going to go down about $20 million, which was expected. The other area that we see a decrease is in the Wind Power Program Initiative, which is also going down roughly about 13.6. So all of those things combined explain the $70 million difference between the 15-16 mains and the 16-17 mains.
Okay, and just perhaps a general question kind of related to this. You know, we have the budget contains detailed numbers on 2 years of budgeting out, but a lot of these programs seem to be rolled out over 5 years, 4 or 5 years. I don't expect you to maybe have these numbers now, and I think you alluded to that, but can we get a commitment for you to come back to the committee with detailed plans for the 3 years following the next two?
Yes, can I just make a commitment to come back after we talk to our Department of Finance colleagues about exactly what the numbers are, and we'll be happy to give you what we can.
Mr. Moore?
You've got 30 seconds.
Okay. Just to finish up then quickly on NEB again. Again, those numbers seem to be going down by $5 million in the coming year, and I just wondered, with all the, and maybe I don't understand this, but with all the new commitments that you've made around the NEB and the new work it has to do, I'm just wondering why the numbers are going down instead of up.
Yes, my understanding is that the NEB numbers would be going up, although I might be caught. We have an interesting situation right now because we have the main estimates, then followed by the budget, and so obviously anything that was in the budget is not included in the main estimates, but my understanding was that the numbers for the NEB were going up, but Cammie, does that ring true?
I think that's the case, is we have a little bit of a timing issue. So from what I understand, the numbers for NEB, there is money announced in the budget for NEB in terms of this upcoming year that would not have been part of it, part of the mains right now.
So perhaps what we could do that would make life easier for all of us would be to take an NEB number that consolidates both the budget proposal, and it is still a proposal at this stage, together with the main estimates, and give that to the committee so that you can understand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, over to you.
Thank you once again for attending. And I just have one quick question. And when I look at the supplementary estimates, and we never got to the question while the minister was here, but with investments in clean technology and specifically around the energy sector, has there been any talk of investments towards small-scale nuclear or modular nuclear, and how, if that was to roll out, how we would see that in the supplementary estimates?
I certainly have been involved in discussions with companies and others that have been advancing the potential for small-scale nuclear. And one of the places where it comes up is in getting power to remote communities. And so there's nothing per se in the budget for that, other than there is a reference to trying to increase our efforts to get cheap, reliable, clean power to remote communities. So under the broad heading of that, it's possible that small-scale nuclear would be one of the technologies that's exploited in that front. So certainly there are some people that think this has potential for that, and at this stage it isn't proven, but whether it's something that we should be spending some time on, that'll be part of the consultation that we really undertake going forward, as well as some of our own internal work to figure out, is this a technology that's going to be productive and over what time frame. But I think, you know, obviously the issue of getting northern remote communities off diesel is one of the policy issues that we would need to look at going forward. So that's a potential option.
Yeah, that answers my question, and I guess that's what the context was around, was remote communities and specifically under two different sizes. So, you know, smaller than say 500 megawatts, and then also small scale. So, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 megawatt units, and both through fission and through small scale fusion. So what I'm asking at this point is that has there been any work done in the past, but cross collaboration between government and the private sector on this?
I think up till now, at least as far as I'm aware, it's been mostly receiving information from private sector companies that have come to say there is this potential. I think going forward, probably there'll be a little bit more of an interactive dialogue on this. And I should just say it is one of many options that we can consider, and one of many issues, frankly, to consider in something like a Canadian energy strategy, which talks about how do we get energy where it needs to go in this country and in what format, and how can we use new innovations and technologies. So I think it's a debate that started, but it hasn't probably matured as far as what you're describing, but I would hope that it would over the near term.
Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. I don't think anybody will begrudge you for not using all the time, so thank you very much. Okay, so we're a little bit ahead of schedule, so I think unless somebody else has another suggestion, I think I will thank the two of you again for coming out today and joining us, and express our appreciation for making the time to be here. So, oh wait, Mr. McLeod, I take that back. You're going to split the time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one quick question, and I won't take too much time. I wanted to ask about the mineral tax credit at the many gatherings across the country, and especially in my neck of the woods. Companies have talked about this tax credit and the desire to see it continue and increased, and so I'd like to ask about the future of this program, this tax credit.
Certainly. So this tax credit has proven to be quite attractive for the mining sector, and in this budget, in budget 2016, it was decided to extend it. It's a temporary credit, so it needs to be extended every year if it's going to continue, and this year it was decided that it would be extended, which I think is certainly people in the industry will say that's very important, particularly at a time when we see low commodity prices across the board, but in the mining sector in particular. And this credit is really pointed to something that works in combination with flow-through shares in the sector to really deliver tax benefits to mining companies. So it has been extended for another year, and certainly people in the industry have been quite vocal in coming forward to say it's very important, particularly at this time when we see commodity prices declining.
Follow-up, then I'm assuming we're going to see this program stay in place for some time, for the long term, and the next question would be, are we going to see this program increased at any point? Is there consideration on that front?
So, as I said earlier, that's probably a good question for the government. It's not such a good one for me. I don't know at this stage. I mean, the government has decided to extend it for a year, and sometime between now and March 31st of next year, there'll have to be another decision as to whether to extend it further, whether to extend it for a longer period of time, whether to increase or decrease the rate. So those are decisions that would be taken, and I can't really say at this stage how those decisions will turn out.
Okay. I think we're done. Unless you have one question. We've got 1 minute left.
Yeah, I have a very quick question. The question is similar to what Mr. Harvey asked. There used to be a concept of using a small modular reactor for oil field to provide the supply power for the extraction process, or even provide the steam for the oil sand. I wonder if that idea is still alive. It has been quite several years.
Yes, I've heard something about that idea, but frankly, just for me, and it could be the people in the department are more familiar with it. I haven't heard much about it recently, but certainly finding a way to get cleaner power into extraction of natural resources is something, there is something that's worth pursuing. There was money put in the budget, $50 million, to try to find technologies that can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in the oil and gas sector. And so I think, as came up earlier in the discussion, part of what we do as we move to a cleaner society is look for new technologies, but also look for ways to extract resources in a cleaner way, and whether it's small modular nuclear or some other technologies. I think those are part of what's on the radar screen as we go forward, trying to look for technological advancements that allow us to produce whatever energy we're producing in a cleaner way.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to end this part of the meeting, so thank you both for joining us today. So we'll suspend for 30 seconds. Nobody else leaves their seats, please. Oh, see, people left their seat. You might have to implement that. I know. Okay, can we resume our seats, please? I wasn't going to say that, but the people who left their seats and didn't follow instructions were all to my left, but thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so there's two. Okay, let's stick to the agenda, folks. Let's stick to the agenda. Yeah. Okay, so we have to now vote on the estimates. There's 5 aspects to it that, as I mentioned at the beginning, and what we're doing is we're voting on the estimates less the interim estimates, which have already been passed by the House. So what I propose to do is go through them individually, and I think we can get through this quickly. So I went through them at the beginning. The first one's dealing with the Atomic Energy of Canada limit. So shall vote 1 under Atomic Energy of Canada limit less the amount granted in interim supply carry. On division? Okay. For the benefit of the rest of the people in the committee, does anybody need clarification what that means? On division means that it's the vote carries. It's not unanimous, but it's we're dispensing with the necessity of identifying who was voting in favor and who was voting against. So everybody's agree with that? Okay. All right. So then item number 1 then passes on division. And number 2, shall vote 1 under Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission less the amount granted in interim supply carry on division. Okay. Item number 3, shall vote 1 under National Energy Board less the amount granted in interim supply carry on division. Okay, thank you. And number 4, shall vote 1 under Department of Natural Resources less the amount granted in interim supply on division. Do I have to read those as well? Okay, shall vote 5 under Department of Natural Resources less the amount granted in interim supply carry on division. Passed, okay. Shall vote 10 under Department of Natural Resources less the amount granted in interim supply carry on division. Passed, okay. And the last one is shall vote 1 under Northern Pipeline Agency less the amount granted in interim supply carry, also on division. Okay. Now, shall I report the votes on the main estimates to the House? Yes? We have unanimous on that one? Okay, all right, thank you. Perfect. Okay, so that takes care of the business on the agenda. There are a couple of other things just procedurally and from a housekeeping perspective that we need to deal with. We're coming back here on Wednesday, and I would like, so we're going to have 3 groups of witnesses on Wednesday. We should have, and I will circulate the agenda, 2 groups, 3 different witnesses, but 2 groups, right?
3 with the first group and 1
3 with the first group and 1 with the second, but they're going to come at the same time in the first hour. They're going to make consecutive presentations, and then we can ask questions. So we will have some time at the end of that. I propose that we use the balance of that meeting as a committee as a whole to set our agenda going forward for the balance of from now until the end of June. In that vein, I would like people to take a look at the witness lists again and turn their mind to it, come here ready to talk in terms of timing and who and when and whatnot, so we can get that tightened up and get that finished. Second thing is there is a delegation of Indonesian parliamentarians who are in Ottawa, and they've expressed an interest in meeting with the members of this committee and the members of the Environment Committee. We'll circulate a note, but there's a reception, or it's a informal meeting over coffee on Thursday morning between 9:30 and 10:30. So I'll circulate something about that, but keep that in mind. And then last, Mr. Cannings, you, and just to clarify, you in one of your questions towards the end, you had asked or proposed that that Mr. Hamilton, Deputy Minister Hamilton, may come back. Is that what you're proposing?
Well, I was asking if he or his staff could provide the figures that I was asking for. I don't know if it's necessary that he physically be here, but I was just more interested in the numbers.
Okay, all right, because that's fine, because I just wanted to clarify that you weren't making a formal request that he return, because if you do that, then we have to deal with that procedurally collectively, and I don't know that we'd get that done. So, all right, so that's fine. So, unless there's any other business, I think we are adjourned for the day, and I will see everybody on Wednesday. There.